Sheesh, Final Fantasy 16. I couldn't wait to review this game, mainly because my favorite action RPG franchise is Kingdom Hearts. Final Fantasy was going a complete action direction, so I need to give a bit of background on myself. I have only played 7 Remake, Strangers of Paradise, Final Fantasy X, and I almost beat Final Fantasy 15. I just couldn't deal with the combat. A lot of the weapons felt like you were swinging a sloppy fish around. But basically, the discourse before this game was, is this a Final Fantasy game? You had Final Fantasy fans losing their minds. So while we will go over the Final Fantasy elements, I'm reviewing Final Fantasy 16 as, is it a good action RPG? Is it a good video game? And to do that, we got to go into each of the elements: story, gameplay, and side content. Now, for this game, I'm actually going to start with the story because it's not going to take too long. It is spoiler free. I'm basically going to be going into the characters and pacing. So in my opinion, more than other RPGs, Final Fantasy 16 is 50-50, with story being the one priority and then combat being the other priority. There's a whole bunch of other stuff, side content, music, that is all fantastic and we'll go into, but this game is prioritizing its story and its combat system. So in 16, you don't have a party that you normally would, where you actually edit your members and play as other people. You got Jill and you got Torgal running around with you, and sometimes some other members, but your protagonist here is Clive. It feels like a lot like Kingdom Hearts, where you're just running around as Sora most of the time. Even less input, to be honest, because Donald and Goofy did more than I would say the party members do here in Final Fantasy 16, but I don't think it necessarily hurts the game. I think DLC with Jill or Sid would be really cool, but as the game is, I think Clive is such a fantastic protag that it carries the game in a way to where you're not needed to have other party members to play as, even though the other characters I do think are developed well. I actually think the characters in this game are better than the actual overall story. Clive is really enjoyable to follow. I love how intense and angry he could be from the events that have come from his life, but he also sheds tears and he shows emotion. I think he's just a super cool character. Also, he looks badass. And you could say the same about Jill, and I love how they just have great chemistry the most of the game. I thought they were fantastic together, and I'm not going to go more in depth on that. You'll definitely get to see their arc unfold. And then you got Sid, who comes in at the beginning of the game, and he's just absolutely hilarious. He had me on my ass laughing. I had great respect for him. So the characters are really good in this game. Torgal is an absolute beast, has some almost character of his own, and he's a damn dog. So I think they did really good on that front. So while I didn't have too much to complain about with characters, I definitely think the story has more faults. Now, this game has some of the most epic moments I've seen in a video game for sure. You probably heard other people say that, but seriously, when you're doing the hype moments and top tier story moments in this game, your brain actually has more dopamine than a raver at Coachella. But here lies the issue, and I feel like it didn't need to be an issue. So on your downtime, some of the quests can be excruciatingly boring, at least for me. And I'm gonna be real with y'all, as I always am. I do not have the greatest attention span, but I can still go and hop on a game like Pokemon Coliseum or Xenogears and read dialogue and be immersed if it's really good and stuff. But some of the downtime in this game, they damn near send you to go pick some flowers. So it gets really rough at times, and you really want to get to the story moments, at least if you're like me and you really want the pacing to be up a notch. It doesn't really make sense though, because some of the side quests have some fantastic cutscenes and story moments. Now, this game uses 3 types of cutscenes, as a lot of other story games do. The low tier ones, they just stand around and chat. The second tier ones are pretty well animated, and then the top tier ones are your big story moment, really big budget cutscenes that are really crazy and animated. And some of the side quests literally have that middle tier cutscene where they're pretty good and have intense story moments. They could have legit cut out a couple of those side quests and put them in the downtime in the main story. Some of the main story quests felt more like side quests than some of the side quests, if that makes sense. People complain about the side quests, but I feel like they weren't that bad. They were pretty decent. Your main side quests are basic fetch quests, yeah, but the plus sign ones will actually give you decent story moments and character development. So I thought the side quests were fine. What wasn't fine was that some of the main story quests had me falling asleep waiting for the actual ones to show up, and I'm just like, they should have just taken some of the side quests, reduced the number of overall side quests, and put those into the main story. It could just be really slow sometimes, and I know some people will sit there and listen to every ounce of lore, which is cool, but this is a very slow-paced game. For it having action combat and pretty bombastic moments, the majority of the game you're treading pretty slowly, walking through town slowly, talking to people, and it's not always boring because the environments are really nice and you're usually having stuff to do, but the game is slow paced, so when you're in those downtime moments and it's even worse, unless you're extremely into the game and you want to listen to all of it, you're going to want to get to some action scenarios. And while I'm going to go into difficulty later in the combat section, I do have to mention it here, the game being pretty easy even on action mode for action game fans and veterans, you're going to be in and out of a combat scenario extremely fast. I had a lot of moments personally where I was waiting for something to happen and I finally get there, I fight a mob and wipe them out in like 20 seconds and then I'm back to a slow-paced cutscene, and those parts really dragged for me. The overall story of the game though I actually really enjoyed, Clive's revenge story and how he progresses, and you're basically trying to take down all of the giant mother crystals because it's actually ruining the world. I think it's a fun revenge story. I was interested most of the time, especially the big story moments. I was on the edge of my seat for sure. Now, I'm gonna be real with y'all. I was laughing pretty hard when I saw some game journalists and reviewers going off on how the story was so amazing and then just tanked towards the end. Now, the game overall is pretty out there. It's still a JRPG, it's still Final Fantasy. There's gonna be a whole bunch of crazy stuff in between your Game of Thrones serious moments. So, the people who only play The Last of Us and God of War, it was a little bit weird to them, but I do not think it detracts from the story at all. I like what they did with the story, and it was very fun for me personally. So people who play a lot of Final Fantasy games or JRPGs are probably going to be fine with what this story does. Again, I think it's going to be the pacing and those downtime moments where people are not going to like very much. Also, as you probably know, the game is very dark in the way it looks and the way its story is. Now, this isn't a problem for most media if that's the story they're trying to tell, but if you have a personality like me and you really wish they braked it up with some comedic moments or something to brighten the mood, it might make you feel a little down, because it did make me feel a little dark the whole time. After a while, I'm like, oh my gosh, man, could these characters catch a break? Now, that's not really the fault of the story. I do think they could have added a couple more environments that are more uplifting to help your mood a little bit. But hey, that's the story they were trying to tell, so if you're someone who likes really dark stories, you're going to enjoy this for sure, I think. So when it comes to the story aspects, I think it was pretty good. Now, it definitely was boring a quarter of the time, I would say, for me, but most people, I think, are going to eat this up and have a really good time. I definitely think the story was a strong suit. Some of these characters are some of my favorites in probably the last 4 years of RPGs I've played. That's a good sign. Now to get onto the gameplay, which is my most anticipated aspect of this game and my favorite part of any action RPG or video game. As you know, Final Fantasy 16 went to action combat. Now, while I don't understand people saying it's the first action Final Fantasy because 15 did that, it did it so much better, and I think that is awesome in itself. Now, I know 15 and 16 had different teams and combat designers, but still, as I made fun of earlier, I wasn't a big fan of 15's combat. It just felt bad. It did not feel good to smack enemies. There was no response to the player to make it emphasis on heavy attacks or anything really. 16 is the opposite. Animation are completely smooth. Every hit you do on an enemy has weight to it. It feels really good to juggle anything in the air in this game. And even though you're pretty slow as Clive, to be able to jump and dodge around the way he does, you feel pretty mobile and fast. So, spoiler alert, as I go into the combat system of this game, I think the combat system itself is pretty dang perfect and they need to keep it. It is too well made to just throw it away for Final Fantasy 17 or maybe a side game. Where the game is lacking, at least for me, is the boss fights. Now, while the story moments with the big icons and stuff get it pretty perfect, they're absolutely amazing, and they give the player control pretty much during those. I mean, it's slow and you're giant monsters, but you still have more control than other games when they try to do these QTE type things. But the problem is with the smaller bosses and the ones you want to fight for fun and test out the combat system. So you basically have your normal combos, and then you could shoot your fireballs with triangle, which gives you some range, and then you can control Torgal, which lets you knock enemies into the air, heal yourself a tiny bit, and overall attack enemies. You're basically going to be learning how to juggle, do combos, and then you're going to be using your abilities for most of the damage. Your iconic abilities are the different elemental abilities you'll be unlocking all game, although there actually is no elemental weaknesses or resistances in this game, which I think was a little bit of a negative. They don't need it, but it would have been nice to use fire on an ice enemy and be able to melt them or something like that. You could literally shoot a fireball at a big pyro enemy and he'll take damage, and it's kind of funny. Learning how all these iconic abilities work and how to smoothly chain them together to get the most damage is honestly really fun, and I honestly praise the animators because everything flows together so good to make everything feel great, and I think that's really important for an action game. Like, people mention they like to just go and smack things in this game because it's so fun. That's because the animators did their job, the sound designers did their job. They made a really good combat system here. And then the problem with the bosses is I feel like that cinematic side leaps into it a little too much, and so let me get into it. The majority of bosses in this game actually don't have too many movesets for you to learn. I would definitely say it's less than a Souls game, and it's definitely less than any Kingdom Hearts data battle that those games previously had. Now, I bring up other games, and especially Kingdom Hearts and stuff, and that's because that's Square Enix's base action RPG, so I feel like they also got some members from the Kingdom Hearts team to help with this game. They're definitely going to be looking at their old games to compare a little bit here. And with the bosses, you know, you're basically aiming at their stagger bar, not their health bar. And once you knock them down, even if they're your size, they're just going to be on their knees while you unleash all of your abilities into them. They don't stagger around. You can't juggle them like you do with normal enemies. So I feel like half the game is taken away when you're actually fighting a boss. Yes, you're learning moves and you're learning how to dodge them and parry them, which I actually think the parry is fantastic because it's more tough to pull off and rewards you, but you're pretty much going to unleash all your abilities into the boss, and that's that. Now, this is totally personal opinion, but I would have loved to see it kind of work almost like a Kingdom Hearts boss, where when you have your opening and you hit the boss, they start staggering, and then the longer your combo goes, like the longer you're chaining your abilities together smoothly, the more damage you're going to get in that combo. Almost like the Lingering Will fight from Kingdom Hearts 2, if you know how that works. The longer your combo goes, the more damage you actually do. I think a system like that would have worked better than what they have, because this is kind of like for 7 Remake, and that game is slower and has turn-based moves, and you're trying to optimize damage. So stagger works in that game, but here it's like, at least for me, it gets kind of boring. You knock them down and you just unleash every ability into them, and while the combat system has so much depth and it is damn near perfect, you don't use much of it once you're in a boss. Like I said, the game is pretty dang easy, which is kind of a fault because you don't have to strategize much. Those trials where they take away some of your iconic abilities, the monolith trials, are some of my favorite parts of the game. Now, it's hilarious because they're actually removing stuff in that. And it's like, you would think that's worse, but I have more fun in that because they're actually making me strategize. When should I use this move? How should I use this move? They need more of that with actual bosses, and I think a DLC where they pretty much focus on strategy and challenge instead of cinematics, I think would be perfect, because this game is trying to tell a story most of the time, almost even through bosses. And while it was fun, I want this game to have replay value. I want it to have longevity, and while Ultimaniac mode and the global leaderboards are definitely welcome, the scoring is a little weird, and you have to go through a giant mission fighting mobs, which are not that hard, to get to the boss you want to fight. And then you get to that boss and it's still got QTEs and other things that are too heavy on cinematics, and I just want to run around as the player and use all my abilities and be challenged with them. I think they could do a lot here with DLC bosses. You have a combat system that has so much depth and so much use, and most of the bosses don't make you use a lot of it. I think this is one of those scenarios where DLC would enhance the game and the game doesn't need it, because the game came as a complete full package for sure, but it was trying to tell a story, and I think DLC focusing on how to bring out each of the aspects to the combat system is just going to do this game a lot of favors. I'm just trying to replay this game over and over, and I'm gonna be real, the Ultimaniac arcade missions are getting old. I just think boss DLC will do wonders for this game, and I hope they also add a bit more to the move sets if they ever added more bosses, because for the bosses they have, a lot of the time you're kind of far away from the boss because they're doing some giant fiery AoE explosion or giant laser you have to move out of the way from. It's more fun when you're in the enemy's face, and also a lot of the time the arena was the same color as the giant laser moves the boss was using, which actually made it kind of hard to see at times, and that was frustrating. Normally I don't really get frustrated if the combat system is designed well. Like this game, I rarely got frustrated, but those moments I did. I genuinely could not see what the hell I was supposed to dodge when there's 45 lasers the same color as the arena we're in coming at my face. So I just want the bosses to be more in your face, have more to their move sets that you have to learn, different swings and their variation. Like, The boss will do one combo move that you have to learn, and it's the same combo they do every time, so it's not hard to learn. And then the rest of their moves will consist of giant AoE explosions, so more combo moves, more variation in those combos, so it's hard to learn, and it actually, catches you off guard because they're doing a different type of swing or kick. So I would love to see some new types of bosses for this game, but again, the combat system that they created here is amazing. I love it. I hope they keep it for 17 because it's one of those where it's the baby right now. They need to make adjustments, they need to add things, and they can make it even better than before very easily, and I think they did a bang up job on their first try. Very awesome. I just want to replay the game more, and at the moment the post game and replay value isn't the highest compared to other RPGs. Now to go into the side content, and this matters a lot because all the mechanics surround the story and gameplay. RPGs and their side content matter a lot because that usually immerses you in the world and adds more stuff to the world. So I think Final Fantasy 16 was a mixed bag. Let's get into it. Unfortunately, I think the armor system kind of sucks. Getting gear in this game is very, very simple. You pretty much get back from a mission and you buy the next best set of armor. There's no infusing elements into your weapons. There's no different type of weapons. There's no elemental stuff you can add, no resistances. So having none of that stuff there does simplify it. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, but I think having better gear and more options besides going for the ultimate weapon on a second playthrough, I think that would have helped the game a lot for sure and made it feel more RPG than just action game. I criticized the slow running speed on my Twitter and a whole bunch of people were laughing and agreed with me, but there was actually a good amount that fought back at me and I thought it was pretty crazy. So let's get into it. In this game, sometimes when you're holding forward on your stick, Clive will start running. I think there's instances when he doesn't, and it's because there's a story moment going on, and even if it doesn't seem like it, if you're in an area that's kind of part of a story, he will not run, and it drove me insane because it felt random. Sometimes within 2 seconds he'll start running, other times he won't. And then other people are like, why don't you just use Ambrosia? I love the Chocobo. I think it's a great mechanic, but it's absurd that when you're riding it, you can't just jump in the battle or talk to any NPCs or pick up items. You have to keep hopping on and off, and it's like a couple seconds, but you'd be surprised after doing it over and over again. You'd rather just run and run straight into a battle or run and pick up an item and then run somewhere else. The game's areas are too big sometimes, and you're literally jogging so slowly. In my opinion, this is kind of one of those things that are a little ridiculous. It's almost plain and simple obvious that they want the game time to be longer, so you're slowly walking around towns, and they want to keep up that cinematic experience, but it hurts the game here. They should add in an update where I can just click a button and I'm running, and I should be able to do it in towns. This is the best cinematic type game I've played so far, for sure, bar none, but I am definitely so sick of these cinematic type games in general, and some of the mechanics have definitely seeped into Final Fantasy 16 where it's just too slow at times. The control is taken away from the player too much. Don't slow me down when I'm in the middle of doing something so you can make the characters talk about something that I wasn't even doing at the moment. Let the player play the game. I brought up these concerns in a previous 16 video I made, and plenty on Twitter, where when I saw the trailers at first and saw the zoomed in left-sided camera angle over the shoulder, I was like, oh no, this game is going to be just like God of War, trying to copy it, and it turned out not to be that way, which was really cool, and I can admit I'm wrong. The game is not as cinematic and Sony story heavy as I thought it was going to be. It is story heavy, but it's basically just typical Final Fantasy stuff. If you ever played Kingdom Hearts or Final Fantasy or most JRPGs, they got a lot of story and cutscenes, but here they don't really sit you through long walking segments, and a lot of the cinematic stuff you're actually given control and you play as the icon, so it's actually a lot of fun. You're not sitting there just always doing QTEs. Now the QTEs they do have, they're kind of ass. I feel like they should have just been cutscenes, like I always say. If they're not challenging to do, and even on Final Fantasy mode where they take away the actual buttons, they're still easy. If it's not challenging to do, I feel like a QTE should just be a cutscene. I don't understand the point of having to click a button to continue the cutscene. On to more positive aspects, I actually liked the side quests in this game. I don't understand the complaints towards them, honestly. I feel like people didn't do enough of them, because once you get past the baseline ones, they actually get better than the last 5 JRPGs I played. other games have way more boring side quests than this game. I actually was entertained. And I like how they have individual party members side quests. Like, you could do one for Jill, you could do one for Torgal even, and it really makes their character more in depth. So I liked the side quests in this game. The music is absolutely godly. It's definitely one of my favorite video game soundtracks of all time now, actually. Square Enix brings me my favorite music a lot of the time. Kingdom Hearts is number one, and Final Fantasy brings usually a lot of amazing tunes as well. But this game, Soken, I am now a huge fan. I'm going to start playing Final Fantasy 14 just to hear this more of his music. Absolutely fantastic soundtrack. I loved it. I feel like the zones and areas in this game were pretty good. Now, like I said, they're a little too dark. Like, they could have had a couple more colorful ones, but the scenery is absolutely beautiful, and most of the texture work is really good. Like, I like just staring at stuff in this game, so they definitely did the areas pretty nice in this game. One thing that drives me insane, though, is that small pools of water you cannot walk through, even if they're shallow, to just be on your knees. Like, so yeah, I really think the game only struggles when it tries to be too cinematic, and the pacing and everything just ends up too slow. So I'm someone who really loves player control. I love when a video game feels very video gamey. They let you play around with a lot of the environment and tools at your disposal. But Final Fantasy 16 crafted a really awesome world, and the serious story they try to tell is something else. I was definitely immersed throughout this game, and I feel like everything kind of goes hand in hand to make that. I just think everything around the combat system could be bumped up a little bit. The bosses, the gear, maybe add some elemental resistances and buffs. I think they could just add a bit more to make it feel a little bit more well-rounded, a little bit more RPG-ish. All said and done, though, the game does have a nice little special place in my heart, and I want to see replay value. I want more DLC, give me more bosses, let me play Final Fantasy 16 even more. Square Enix, awesome game. Honestly, it definitely made me want to go back and try more Final Fantasy games, so that's cool. It's always good when a new game does that. Does it beat Final Fantasy X as my favorite game? They're like tied. I can't tell you just yet if Final Fantasy 16 is my new favorite Final Fantasy, but it's almost looking like it, and it has to do with, honestly, the characters. I really enjoyed the characters in this game, and for as much as a combat nut I am, I enjoyed walking around this world and being told a story that was genuinely interesting and suspenseful. I need more stories like this where they take it as seriously as they did. So I hope you guys enjoyed my Final Fantasy 16 review, critique, going into each of the elements. Let me know down in the comments what you think of Final Fantasy 16. Did I make some good points? I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you in the next review. Peace.